thing on my own computer just for my own use. So if anybody doesn't want to be recorded, turn your video off and change your name and disguise your voice or whatever. All right, so the topic tonight is a paper by Daniel Dennett, Quining, Qualia. And the idea is to, here's my plan for the evening. I'll make some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll just go through the paper piece by piece and talk about it. For those people who have noises in the background, I'd appreciate it if you would mute your mic, but otherwise feel free to leave it open. So when we get to, after my introductory remarks, when we get to the discussion, I'll just throw it open. There's a facility for raising your hand, and it's in the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. It's called Reactions, and you can raise your hand, and then it shows up as a hand being raised, and then you can lower your hand. So when we get to the point where we want to have a lot of discussion, I'll ask people to raise their hands, and I'll try to attempt to call on people in the order that they raise their hands. If we're on a particular topic and you have something you just need to say about that topic, feel free to jump in. Don't pay attention to the raise hands things, as long as it's on that topic. If it goes off to something else, I'm going to say, oh, okay, hey, wait your turn. But the idea is to just have an open discussion here. All right, so the topic is a paper, Quining, Qualia, in which Dennett attempts to demonstrate that there are no such things as qualia. All right. I personally don't like the term qualia because it's a philosophical term of art, but there's no standard definition of it. Qualia is a plural term, and the singular ought to be qualium, but oddly it's not. It's quail, and there's lots of different opinions about what a quail is, and it just seems odd to me. I guess it's a technical term in philosophy, but I can't imagine anybody going around, oh, look at all the nice qualia. Wow, this is cool. Look at the qualia. It doesn't quite fit, but then, okay, it's a philosophical term of art. So Daniel Dennett says there aren't no such things as qualia. Okay, so to start off with, what is he talking about? What are qualia? Anybody that wants to answer that question, please. Just pipe up. If it gets too out of hand, I'll ask people to raise their hands. But
I've taken it to just mean sensations.
Sensations, okay. Anybody else?
I think it means the attributes of the characteristics or attributes of the things that we perceive.
Characteristics or attributes of the things we perceive. So if
Perceptions.
I hold up perceptions, okay. Anybody else? What is he talking about? What is he saying doesn't exist? We'll get to that part, the not existing part later. But what are we talking about here? Perceptions, sensations, attributes of things we perceive. What else?
He's saying that what doesn't exist is the ineffable, intrinsic, private, directly apprehensible properties of experience. I would say that he's mostly wrong,
Okay.
but I guess we will get to that.
Yeah, good. Okay, so there's a number of sort of definitions in the first part of this paper. He talks about, in terms of visual qualia, I want to say qualiums. That's just me. The particular personal subjective visual quality of a visual experience. So there's a term quality there. That's quality, qualia. These are having to do with qualities. He talks about raw feels, phenomenal properties, subjective or intrinsic properties, the qualitative, there's that qualitative thing again, the qualitative character of experience. On page 386, he says, qualia are simply the qualitative or phenomenal features of sense experiences, in virtue of which they resemble and differ from each other qualitatively in the ways they do. He's quoting a guy named Shoemaker, which which, and they're accessible to introspection. So somebody give me some examples of qualia.
Like the redness of a red apple compared with the greenness of a green apple. What
Okay.
distinguishes the perception of a green apple from a red apple? It's the redness and the greenness.
Redness and greenness, good. That's okay, good. Anybody
Flavor
else?
of a strawberry.
Flavor of a strawberry, good. Uh-huh. There's a quote in there from farther down in the paper from Einstein. It says, science tells us nothing about the taste of soup. I think it's the taste of soup, he says. So it's the taste of something, the taste of a strawberry, the appearance, the redness or greenness of apples, that kind of thing. Okay.
I would say that the pain or the pleasure associated with certain experiences are qualia, but I have the feeling they're a special class. But they're another example of qualia, pain and pleasure.
So pain and pleasure might be considered qualia.
Well, he gives it. He gives examples of coffee tasting and beer drinking.
Okay.
And he uses 2 case studies, separate people. But I'm wondering, and then he uses inversion inverting the qualia, right? So one person, like a mad scientist or an evil scientist, can invert the optical sensory system, at the eyes and then in the memory section. So to make it appear that the grass is red and the sky is some other color other than blue or violet, right?
Yeah.
But I was wondering, qualia, what about when someone looks at art or listens to music or sits by a campfire and gets different, and each people gets their own different experiences? Does that qualify as qualia?
Well, that's a good question. He gets into that later on. I think what he would say is the sound of the violins or the cellos or the fuzziness of the rock guitar, whatever kind of music you're listening to, those things qualify as qualia. Whether you enjoy it or not, I'm not sure about the answer to this, frankly. It relates to what Tommy was saying, whether your particular quality of enjoyment, is that qualia? I mean, the term is so vague, but
I would make it vaguer. I would widen it. I would say that it is experience. So the first example that was given was by Les Allen.
yes.
And he used the redness of the apple and the greenness of the apple. But if I'm holding the apple and I'm lying back on a soft divan and I'm seeing the redness or greenness of the apple, I'm also seeing, for instance, the sun, the bright sun in the window on the left. And I'm also seeing, because I'm looking at the apple, right? I have nothing obstructing me. I do not have an essay by Dennett in front of my eyes, which is keeping me from seeing the horizon, which is indistinct, and the sun, which is bright, and the redness and greenness of the apple. And all of that at the same time is melding with my experience of my body lying on the divan and my hand lying on my chest and the sensations throughout the body. So he's trying to separate out, sound from taste, from sight, other senses, interior experience. You cannot do that because that is not the way consciousness works. So if there is such a thing as qualia, and I think there is, I think it has to include all the phenomenal experiences, all the interior experiences that one is having at the time of the perception or even the thought. Thought too has a quality to its experience. It incites emotion, even if that emotion is vestigial in the background. So a qualia to me is a sui generis experience in the instant. That's what qualia is.
Okay. Well, I like what you're saying, that a red apple or a green apple, you don't just see a red apple or a green apple. As you say, there's a whole panoply of things: the sunlight, the trees out the window, the warmth of the divan or whatever. And at some place in here, he agrees with that. You don't have individual. Here's a qualium, and here's another qualium. Here's another one. You don't have that. It's all together. Okay.
If I may add one thing,
Yes.
I don't believe qualia is dependent on sensory information,
Yeah.
because we could, in some general form, imagine, we are completely cut off from the outside world. No sensory information, nothing. But is the qualia gone? Is the consciousness gone? Probably not. So, of course, the problem with consciousness is just difficult to, define. But it seems like, in general language, how we use it, and probably many philosophers use it, is something on the top of the sensory information. Like which is, this topic mostly connects to artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that. And we are trying to separate the sensory part, all the parts that you have, that can any machine have or animals have or anything else, from that extra thing that we have, which comes on the top of it, which I would say, of course, this is mechanism, how that is, what that extra thing is, what it does. Of course, there's a lot of disputes, but I would say one way to imagine it would be that extra thing.
Okay. Extra
What's
thing.
the word? What was the last word?
The
What
extra
was the
thing.
last word,
that's-
Matthew?
I said the extra thing on the top.
Oh, the extra thing. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
yeah. So we can imagine. We don't even imagine. We have self-driving cars, or at least semi-autonomous cars, that can in some way detect their environment and avoid pedestrians and turn left and right and see the red light and so forth. In addition to the detecting and the responding, is there something else? That is to say, does the world appear to the self-driving car in a way analogous to the way it appears to us? That's a way to get at what I think Masood was saying, something supposedly extra. Okay, so he says, he talks about the qualitative or phenomenal features of our experience, of which they resemble and differ from each other.
Can I just make a point about Bill? Sorry, just to on the last topic. I think it's whether or not our pain or pleasure or enjoyment qualifies as a qual. They're different. You should distinguish between them and the actual what Les was referring to, the quality of the actual object or experience that you've got, because you and I can both see the redness of an apple, but we will may enjoy them to different degrees. So there's not complete uniformity between those two concepts. So it's worth distinguishing between the two concepts.
Right, okay, good. So, and Dennett has one of his intuition pumps, and we'll get to that very point. Okay, so he says his thesis is there are no such properties as qualia. The redness of the apple, or the greenness, those things don't exist, according to Dennett. Now the question is, what the heck is he talking about? Because it seems, what I want to do here is try to be as sympathetic to Dennett as possible, even though just on the face of it seems completely absurd. To me, it seems completely absurd. But let's try to figure out what Dennett is trying to say. His thesis is there are no such things as properties as qualia. He says on page 382, I do not deny the reality of conscious experience. Okay, good. But conscious experience has no properties that are special in any of the ways qualia have been supposed to be special. And then later on, he's going to list those ways. Qualia are not even something about which nothing can be said. Qualia is a philosopher's term which fosters nothing but confusion, refers into the end of no properties or features at all. So we have this word, qualities, or qualia, or subjective quality, phenomenal properties. he's saying those terms don't refer to anything. So, okay. And the way he's going to argue for his position is in a series of intuition pumps. So this is philosophy, it's not science. We don't do experiments, we are trying to clarify concepts in some way. So we have these intuition pumps that allow us to think about things. So intuition pump number 1, watching you eat cauliflower. What's that one about? Who can just briefly describe that one? Page 383.
I understood the first 2 pumps to be, he describes this, they're trying to kind of expose or demonstrate the problem that we have here. So the first one is we seem to feel if someone likes cauliflower and someone else doesn't like it, then it's almost like there's an explanatory gap that the people who are subject to this problem, there's an explanatory gap. They say, well, they're both eating the same cauliflower, we can see the same correlates perhaps in the brain, but one is feeling something different from the other, and we're going to call that explanatory gap, the reason for that, we're calling that qualia. It's a special thing. It's almost an apophatic in theology. Sometimes you'll describe God as what he's not. And so we've got this hole in our explanatory chain, and the idea of the cauliflower is what's going on. And so the temptation is to say, well, maybe we don't know what it is yet, but there's something missing. It's like Masood saying there's the layer on top. It's not enough to talk about the correlates and the chemicals, and there's something more going on. And he's saying, so this cauliflower pump illustrates that. And he's saying, don't be fooled. This is an example of the kind of fooling that we're all undergoing. But he'll take us on later to undo that. But this one right now is to try to cast the illusion, I think.
Right. So the cauliflower thing is, Dennett doesn't like cauliflower, but he sees other people eating cauliflower and wondering how could you possibly relish that taste? And then, maybe cauliflower tastes different to you. To me, it tastes terrible. To you, it tastes good. I have the same thing with Brussels sprouts, by the way. Cauliflower is okay,
but Bill, can I just ask one question? So, I mean, I think one of the way Dennett, is opposing the qualia is using the definition against us, right? Because we have been trying to define qualia, basically, like say the apple example, right? It's like seeing the red apple versus seeing the green apple. But you can't, I don't believe in qualia, the way I experience qualia between my red apple and green apple will be the same as yours, right? It's impossible to compare. It's very hard to do interpersonal comparison of qualia versus, I think each qualia is unique. So with his, let's say, a surgery argument, right? Where, when they open my brain and they reverse all my optic nerves, so I experience everything opposite. That's fine because I am experiencing I'm having a new interaction with my environment based on my new physiology. I am no longer me because you changed me. You have reversed all my optic nerves. So now I have a new qualia. It doesn't deny the fact that my old qualia was legitimate based on my old physiology. You see what I'm saying? So
yeah. Well, we're gonna get to that.
Is it a new one or is it just an additional one?
I'm sorry, say that again, whoever said that.
Is it a new qualia or just an additional one?
When your perceptions are inverted. Hey, let's hold that question, because that's one of the core arguments that I'll get to. So I just want to go through this piece by piece here. But in that section about watching somebody eat cauliflower, one thing he says, you can't isolate the qualia from everything else that's going on, which was, I think, Masood's point or Victor's point, I forget who said that. But you can imagine taking such cases and stripping them down gradually to the essentials, leaving their common residuum, the way things look, sound, feel, taste, smell, to various individuals at different times, independently of how they are subsequently disposed to behave or believe. That's page 384. So we can imagine thinking about things, how things look, sound, feel, taste, smell, and so forth, independently of how they are, the individuals are subsequently disposed to behave or believe. That little phrase there is crucial to what Dennett's program is, because he's saying what you can publicly observe, people's behaviors, or what their verbal behaviors that tell you what they believe. Those are somehow more real or more fundamental or something than the way things just look, sound, feel, taste, and smell. All right, I have a few people with their hands up. Hey, good. Okay, let's go in order. Claudio Galaxy, go ahead.
Well, basically, obviously, Dennett he's a materialist, physicalist, right? So he believes that our experiences, he doesn't deny that we have different experiences when we taste, when we see, when we hear, right? It's just that he believes that they're not intrinsic. They can all be reduced to the physical realm, right? To our biological system, to our neurological system, all the way down to the atomic level. Now, the people who are pro-qualia are just the opposite, right? So if they're saying if the cauliflower tastes differently, it's something intrinsic. We all have different experiences. It's separate from the physical. The materialist aspect or the physical aspect cannot explain that. It's something that cannot be detected. So I guess it's outside the standard element, the standard table of elements, right? Because that explains all of reality. So it says that
there's a middle ground, Claudia.
Hmm?
There's a middle ground. Galen Strawson, I think, the papers that Bill provided us with, he would claim to be a materialist, but he believes in qualia. I think there's his position, I think, is a panpsychist. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people who would follow what you're saying, but there is this ground in the middle where you've got a materialist who does believe in qualia.
Yeah, but just an aside about Strawson, he redefines the term physical to include the mental, and then say, oh, well, if you're really a real physicalist, then you'll have mental anyway. That's a sort of a sidebar. But thank you, Claudio. Let's go to Les Allen.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, look, I'm pretty unconvinced by Dennett's intuition pump one. He seems to be assuming what he's setting out to say here. He's really taking a Gilbert Ryle behaviorist approach here, that we can't isolate the taste of the cauliflower from the other behavioral contextual elements. And sure, in the way we interact with other people and the way we make our judgments about what other people taste, sure, that's fine. But we can all very easily isolate the taste of the cauliflower from the taste of the orange juice, or the taste of the cauliflower when it was tasting good and the taste when we were tasting a rotten piece of cauliflower. We can. I mean, it's just everyone's experience that we can isolate those particular subjective elements. And he's saying you can't do it without looking at the whole contextual framework, especially behavior. But he's just making a statement there. He's not backing it up. He tries to back it up in the rest of the paper. But what I'm saying is just intuition pump one on its own is not doing the work that I think he thinks it's doing.
Intuition pumps 1 and 2 are to sort of get us to understand what he's arguing against, right? Okay, so who's next? Dan Eckham, go ahead.
Yeah, I think something that could bear more emphasis in our definition and understanding of qualia is that it's sort of this intrinsic property that's kind of separable as an essence from the thing that has that character. And so it's not just the experience of looking at a red apple or a green apple. It's what does it mean to be looking at red? Or what does it mean to taste cauliflower in the absence of actually eating cauliflower? We can rely on our memory of what that tastes like, or we can rely on our memory of what a red apple looks like. But that redness or that cauliflower tastiness is not an intrinsic essential thing unto itself. It's kind of like what Les was saying. I think it's contextual.
Okay, good. Masood.
Oh, thank you. I think saying that he is anti-qualia is incorrect. He is just defining it, with like any other scientist, giving infallible, private, whatever, and then brings us like a couple of examples that, show it's not, we cannot pin down any entity anywhere with those qualities, and that's it. So if we are not happy with his definition of qualia, we can just change it, come up with a new definition of qualia, and then go for, either proving it, whatever. But saying that he doesn't believe there is a qualia, or I experienced this, I think this is an incorrect response to him, because he's not saying you don't experience anything. It's just saying, you see these four, can we pin down anything with these four? No, so there is no such a thing. That's it. I just want to say, we have to be careful about the definition.
Okay, good. Alex Smith, go ahead. Alex? If you're speaking, Alex, we can't hear you. Maybe your mic is off. Well, I don't know what happened to Alex. Okay. If you want to come back later, Alex, raise your hand again. Victor Provenzo, go ahead. Provenzano, go ahead.
I think one of the important things here is he's introducing the element of time, right? This is actually an attempt, yes, to get us to understand qualia, rather than to undermine the concept, this initial intuition pump. But what's essential here in trying to undermine what he is seeking to undermine is to see that he has introduced the notion of temporality here. There's the implied idea of memory in terms of the first sip versus the second sip. And then he's being more abstract, and he has, he refers to Dennett at time T1, Dennett at time T, and Dennett at time T1, what he's going to do throughout his argumentation is use temporality when it suits his argument, and then leave out temporality or deny that it's essential in the instance that he's talking about when it doesn't suit his argument. So his attempt to show the contradictions in a definition of qualia, which is his, I think, and his alone, are contradictory in part through his use and non-use of the element of time. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm going to call on Tommy. That was Alex Smith, right? Okay. So, Tommy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think he's being far more critical than what we've been saying recently there. I think he's, if he was here, I imagine him saying, no, guys, no, it really is as bad as I'm saying it is. The qualia, when he says further down after pump 2, qualia are not even something about which nothing can be said, referring back to Wittgenstein's Strategist. Qualia is the philosopher's term which fosters nothing but confusion and refers in the end to no properties or features at all. Now, he's saying this is a fiction. It's just, why are you talking about it at all? And I think he would see, in response to the cauliflower, to me, it seems completely reasonable. We would ask, is my experience of the cauliflower at time t the same as at time t prime? Or is my experience at t the same as Masood's at time t? And he's saying there's something wrong with that itself, thinking that that's a reasonable thing to say. My reaction is, what can you be talking about? Of course, that's a reasonable thing to say. And again, I'll go back to Wittgenstein. I think it's he's pointing to a potential bewitchment of language. He's saying, no, there's nothing there. You guys, you Qualia believers, you think there's a thing, you've got a name for it, and it's just not at all. I think he's been that radical.
Yes, he is a Wittgensteinian. He says elsewhere someplace that he's thoroughly in the tradition of Wittgenstein, which is why some of his stuff, to those who are.
So I don't want to preempt that right now, but I think he's making a huge mistake, and that's where his error is. I think he's in error, and it's because he hasn't. I hate to hesitate to say this, that someone like a pro philosopher like Dennett, but I think he's missed the point that Wittgenstein was making in the same way that Eyre missed it, the Vienna Circle missed it, and Russell missed it in the introduction to the Tractatus. I think that is a large part of what's going on here, but that's for later.
Okay, that's a sidebar. I tell you what, let's go on to Intuition Pump 2, the wine tasting machine. So the idea is that, or you could make a machine that would detect all the chemical properties of wine and then somehow make a judgment as if a human being was making the judgment. And maybe it's even a very accurate wine tasting machine. And if it says something about the qualities of a certain Pinot and somebody drinks it, yeah, he's got it exactly right. Our intuition is that even if the machine could do that, there's no inside in the machine. The world does not appear to the machine in the way as it appears to us. There's this phrase, what it's like. And the idea is there's nothing it's like to be the machine in the same way as something it's like to be us. Now, I don't like that term because, in fact, there's nothing it's like. It's a whole different topic, but the what it's like makes sense if you're comparing, say, a red apple to a green apple. Well, what's a red apple like? Well, it's like a green one, but it's red. Okay, but they're both things out there in the world, and you can compare them. An orange is like an apple, and it's round, but it's not like an apple because it's orangey and bumpy and has a different flavor and so forth. So that's Intuition 2, and the idea is he's just trying to get us understanding what the ordinary person would think. That's what he's arguing against. He does have this thing. He comes up with the properties are the properties of Qualia. They're supposed to be ineffable. You can't talk about them. Intrinsic, whatever that means. Private, that is to say, if I have a perception of a red apple, even if Tommy's sitting right next to me looking at the same apple, my perception is mine, Tommy's is his. Two separate things. They're private. And directly or immediately apprehensible in consciousness. I have another thing about what's that mean, in consciousness. So I think what he means is when you are conscious, you can directly or immediately apprehend this quail, the redness, and so forth. He's saying those things don't exist, or nothing exists that has all four of those properties to be sort of friendly to Dennett. All right, so let's go on to Intuition Pump 3, the inverted spectrum. Who can tell me, just briefly describe the inverted spectrum thing? What's that about? Somebody's already mentioned it a little bit. I just want to focus on that for a minute. Who could tell me what the inverted spectrum thing is?
What page are you on right now?
Well, this is Intuition Pump 3, which is on page 387. It's the first one under the heading of the traditional paradox regained. So this is the thing about, I'm looking up at the blue sky and I see blue. How do I know what your blue is the same as mine? The answer is we don't. There's no possible way because our experience is private. And so the thought experiment is, maybe your quails are inverted from mine, right? I see a blue sky, you see what I would think of as being yellow, except I can't see what you see. So even if you see it as what I would think of as yellow, you call it blue, and so we're all good.
I think his process here is, so he's exposed this to Intuition Pumps 1 and 2, and saying, see, this is what you do if you're a bit crazy, you Qualia believers. And this is now, what's this one doing? Pump 3. And he talks about this, and he said, I think he's basically saying, isn't that a bit worrying? Isn't that a bit curious that you couldn't tell the difference if your spectrum's inverted? I think his intention is that you kind of take a step back and say, that's kind of weird. I feel so much that this, the cauliflowers this and the wines this, but yeah, no, you're right, Dennett. That is a bit weird. Yeah. And I think that's the purpose of this in the next pump is to make you start to think, wait a minute, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe he's got a point to what he's going on, because this is just peculiar.
It is, okay. And then intuition pump 5, let's go 4. We're still in 4. The brainstorm machine. Somehow you can hook up wires to somebody's brain, and then you can experience what they're experiencing. It's from some movie that maybe I ought to watch, but we think that we could do that. That's what he says here. So with eyes closed, I accurately report what I think is blue, you see as yellow, but we both call it blue. But then he says, what if the technician unplugged it and turned it in the other way, and then, I see it the same thing as you do. And his point is, what is his point here in intuition pump 4? All right, he says, now I report, first I report the sky's yellow and the grass is red, then somebody pulls the plug and turns it in the other way. Now I report the sky's blue, the grass is green. What is the right orientation of the plug? Designing and building such a device would require that its fidelity be tuned or calibrated by the normalization of 2 sub-6 reports. So, which we can't. You can't compare person A's private experience to certain person B's private experience because they're both private. Hence, he says, the intersubjective comparison of qualia, no intersubjective comparison of qualia is possible, even with perfect technology. Okay, that's the first. He's just kind of getting into his argument. Now, what about intuition pump 6? So we've got. 5. We're on 5. 5 is. Oh, right. Okay. 5 is this thing. I see that 3 people have their hands raised. I tell you, let's stop and call on these people. I don't want to just barrel on. All right, so Phil, go ahead and say what you want to say, Phil.
Well, it seems to me what he's introducing is going to create a whole lot of problem for aesthetic sensibilities. Mm. I mean, I think that there's 2 aspects that's important. I do believe that a singular experience is not enough. When we experience something, it does rest on the context, the totality of the context we feel. As an example, you cannot appreciate just a violin and the viola and then something else as separate things. Let's say if you have like a score and every one of the people in the symphony comes in and they play their part perfectly. And you say to the guy, like, did you experience the orchestra? I mean, of course you didn't, because you just experienced them changed separately, not as a whole put together. Okay, so that's number 1. And number 2, it seems to me is private in this sense. It seems to me, for instance, you take the orchestra and you do an excellent recording and press it on a record or digital, whatever, okay? Taking into account that, there's going to be some slight difference in the quality of the mechanical process itself, but it does produce a facsimile of that. And so you could reproduce it, but you cannot reproduce the experience until somebody hears the record and say, oh, yes, now I see that, Leonard Bernstein's conducting is different from this and that because how it's put together. And so the problem there is that individuals experience things differently in the totality and even in the reproduction. But we do have the feeling that the privacy is shareable to some degree, because we do have people, what we should say, maybe we shouldn't say it, but we would say they have taste. They seem to be able to make minute judgment about the quality of the music versus somebody else, or the quality of the wine. And even if you could simulate and produce exact chemical relationship, and so now the really quality tasters say, "Oh my God, that is a really good wine," and his judgment by the chemical relationship is as good as the most qualitative wine taster. It still did not experience the wine. It just sort of reproduced a facsimile that is a synthetic construction. So therefore, however, to say, well, if everything's private, then we might as well like forget about quality. We're just like, you listen to that music, I listen to it. We will all have different judgment, and don't tell me about your opinion and your judgment about the quality. Whatever, you're just trying to put off a kind of superiority over me. But that's not true. We do have judgments of people, whether they're art critics, people that criticize novels or symphonies or whatever, that we do put some value in them in terms of their judgment. And even though that's private, it is shareable to a certain degree. And after you, in a sense, listen and carefully understand what they're saying, then you begin to say, I think he's got something there. Like I am beginning to hear this in a more minute way than I expected before. So that is a private thing, but it could be translated into a conversation, not with the exactitude of mathematics, but there is a degree that you do trust people who you quote as having taste, and somehow understand, appreciate the whole context better than you. So otherwise you might want to throw aesthetics out of the window, because nothing is any better than anything else.
So what you're saying in a way is that the qualities of our experience are not actually ineffable, that you can talk about them and you can get other people to experience something similar. I think that's what you're saying. This is four properties: ineffable, intrinsic, private, directly apprehensible to consciousness. They're not really completely ineffable. That's what you're saying.
They're not going to be exact match, but you could learn from them by sort of like continue to listen and continue to say that as they point out, you see these minute details you didn't understand that before, and as you hear it, say, "Oh yeah, that's right. I actually didn't detect the subtlety there." Right. So you could talk about it, and you're not gonna get to the point where you say, "Oh, my taste is just as good as Leonard Bernstein's." No, but you could get closer and closer. So.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Phil. I've got Claudio and Victor, and then Claudio and Victor. Okay. Go ahead, Claudio.
Well, Dennett, being the materialist, with these experiences, trying to show that the experiences, the qualia, is not actually private, right? Because the person who is experiencing, for example, the red grass, or the let's say the red sky, no, the red grass and some color other than the blue or violet sky, is unaware that it's been shifted, right, by the scientist. So there's no introspection in that way, right? It's not private. So he needs help from those scientists to describe the experience for him. So how could it be intrinsic in that way? How could it be private? Right? What does intrinsic imply? It implies that it's that the experience, the qualia, is unanalyzable, but in fact it is being analyzed by someone outside, right? The scientists, right? Those people who are are inverting the optic sensory components, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's what he is. That's what he is proving, I believe. That's what I'm getting from it.
okay.
So there's no, yeah.
I think he's not actually proving anything in this paper,
What
but
he's trying. Yeah.
he's trying to get us to see the world from his point of view and to see how our concepts don't make sense. But yeah. Okay, Victor Provenzano, go ahead.
So I think we have to think of the series and keep this series in mind, because what he's doing is creating a series of transitions, bridges, syntheses that are highly complex, right?
Yes.
So in the previous intuition pump, he was using the computer to introduce the idea of a philosophical zombie, right? It's incapable of qualia. In this one, he's using the device that transfers the experience of one person into the consciousness of another as a kind of philosophical vessel. And he's suggesting, as opposed to a philosophical zombie, and this philosophical vessel, I would claim, has, because of the nature of qualia, the uniqueness of qualia, has an imperfect apprehension of the experience of the person that they are brainstorming with, right? And then there is the issue of, he's introducing through this brainstorm machine the notion of public properties, which he's trying to use to replace the notion of private properties, right? These are
Yes.
properties that can be shared, that can be shared in part, they can be described in part, like the voice of the osprey, the chook chook of the osprey, the cheeping sound, which is enough to allow him to distinguish the osprey, but then he wonders if it's a half octave higher, is that the call of an osprey? So it's at least some kind of intersection between the circle of perception for the osprey and the circle of perception of a bird that is either also an osprey or has a call that is similar to the osprey. He's trying to suggest, with this notion of the practically ineffable as opposed to the ineffable, that, you know, and the transmission can occur through language. You know, we don't have, just as I don't have the same experience of the osprey's call, I don't have the same experience of the word qualia, I don't have the same experience of the word consciousness, I don't have the same definition for any of the words that Mr. Dennett uses in this essay. So he's trying to introduce a very, very complex set of arguments. This is the transition, right? Philosophical zombie to philosophical vessel. This is the transition already to the notion of public properties through this brainstorming device. And because he's got the outside observer, as well as the, you know, is a way of implying the sharing of experience through language of the individual, right? That's something measurable. There's the verificationist, right, and the scientist, as opposed to the individual who is simply trying to practically express, in part, incompletely, the experience of the qualia. But here's what he leaves out when he says that qualia are, these experiences are practically ineffable. They are ineffable in this sense: one cannot express a single experience anywhere near its completeness with language. It is simply impossible. There is the relation between words and things is utterly arbitrary, except in the case of automatopoeia, and then it's an imperfect alignment between the sounds. So he's introducing all of these ideas, and he's making a transition, and he's really trying to comment mostly on the coffee drinkers in each of these.
Okay, I guess we're still on Intuition Pump 4, right? So I'm going to call on Mike. Claudia, you've spoken quite a bit and so I'm going to call on Mike, and then, so go ahead, Mike. But then I want to keep going through these intuition pumps. But go ahead, Mike.
A short comment on public properties and private properties. There's a lot of work going on with electronic communication to prosthesis, hands and legs, at DARPA and other places. And how a person uses those things, even though they have the same mechanical device, how a person uses it, they implant similar, basically the same electrodes, and it's on the order of 3,000 hair-thin wires into the brain for two-way communication. And they don't have enough prostheses, so you sign up to do the prosthesis for a few hours a week, and somebody else gets it another time. And how the signaling and the adaptive computer programming work to get exactly the same result. And they can, for example, reach into your back pocket.
So, Mike, Mike, what does this have to do with the subjective qualities of our experience?
Oh, okay. The technique in used and the signals going across the electrodes are different for each person that's been trained to use this thing. So he's learned how to use it, but he's learned a different way of using it. So I guess it's that the public and private properties of what goes on in the programming to use it that's adapted, and how the brain learns how to do that, to me seems similar to how we learn to address red and different shades of red. And,
okay.
What kind of signaling goes across the electrodes and into the computer, and the programming that gets done inside the computer by the device that's learning it. So,
okay, great. Thank you.
Tangential. I don't know if it emphasizes public and private properties.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I've got Masood, Alex, and Ben. So let's try to keep the comments brief, because I do want to go on to the next few. I want to for sure get down to intuition pumps 7 and 8, but we're still on 4, I think it is. So
Bill,
go ahead, Masood.
Bill, would you like me to just wait for you to go a little bit further and then we speak, or?
That'd be fine if you can do that. Sure.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
I can do the same. I can wait and.
Okay, Alex, and then Ben, what's on your mind? Hello, Ben.
Are you calling on me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, just a very brief thing that I can't quite wrap my head around, but at times he seems to want to make a distinction between experience and the state of mind. He distinguishes between his visual experience and his visual state. And he calls qualia a property of consciousness, as opposed to property of, say, experiencing an apple per se. And it seems to me, I have a hard time understanding this, but I think understanding this distinction he's making is important. But unfortunately, I don't quite understand the distinction he's making.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where that comes in, so I don't have an answer for that. Let's go on. Intuition pump. All right, so we've talked about the brainstorm machine. There's problems with that. Intuition pump 5. So the first two, numbers 3 and 4, were having to do with how would you tell if your experience of the world was the same or different from somebody else's experience. Now, in in numbers 5 and 6, he's talking about comparing your experience at one time with your own experience at another time. So it's not between subjects, it's all intrapersonal, intrasubjective. And so assuming some kind of neurological intervention so that you, all of a sudden, the sky that was blue, all of a sudden, whoa, that's yellow. How did that happen? And so that thought experiment or that intuition is alleged to illustrate that, yeah, there's something real about private perceptual content, let's say, qualitative aspects of what you experience. Because if you could get your intuition, your subjective qualities inverted, then you could tell the difference. You can't tell the difference between my experience of the world and Tommy's or Martin's or Claudio's. But if it's just mine, then if my Qualia suddenly got inverted, so blue was red and green was yellow, or blue was yellow and green was red and so forth, I would notice it, according to that one. Then he goes on, Intuition Pump 6, about alternative neurosurgery. Does anybody remember what exactly that was about? If not, I'll...
He's talking about how would he achieve what was done in 5, and he talks about in the chain of events that gets from the outside world into your qualia. You can hit it at the early on, or you can hit it very, very late on. And I think and his point is we still can't. There's just no way to tell it. I think each of 3, 4, 5, and 6 is an attempt to say, or 3 says, look, here's this problem. Are you not worried? And then 4, 5, and 6 are like, but what about this? And he says, well, that's a good idea, but nah, that won't work. So 5 says, well, this is a good idea. And then 6 is like, come on, this one must do it. No, he's saying it doesn't. None of this is going to help you. You're stuck with this problem as you cannot. And I'd probably, Bill, with what you said there, he's trying to show that it's not real. I think what he's trying to do is to show that it cannot be shown in natural science. He's making the error of the verificationist. He's saying that the meaning of the statement is the method of its verification. And if you can't do it, it doesn't mean anything. And in his case, he's then jumping to say, therefore, it's nonsense in a meaningless way. But so he's trying to get into science. He's saying, can you do a scientific experiment to show the inversion? What about the inversion in the one person? What about an inversion that we achieve it here at the eye socket or here back further in? No, you can't. You can't do science to make a distinction between the qualia here and the qualia there. Ergo, it ain't there. And that ergo is the problem.
Right. Okay, that's a very good point, Tommy. This is really crucial. So this neurological alternative neurosurgery. So he says, okay, suppose you can invert your qualities, your qualia. What was blue now appears to you as yellow, and so forth. Well, he says, there's more than one way you could accomplish that. One is to do something as the information is coming in from the outside world, such that when it gets to your brain or whatever, it's different. The other way to do it is not to alter that at all, but to alter your memory of what used to be. Okay, so what appears to me to be, what used to be blue, I now see as yellow, and I think that's weird. But what if my memory is, what if it was yellow all along, and my memory has been changed to think it was blue? And he says there's no way to tell. That's his point. And it's a very good point, Tommy. From an objective, scientific, publicly observable, experimentally verifiable point of view, there's no way to tell what caused the qualia to appear to be inverted. All right. I mean, fine. There's no way to tell. What he's talking about, though, is the etiology of this inversion. But does that actually demonstrate that the inversion didn't happen? I personally don't think so. I think he's, but anyway, all right, let's keep it on this 5 and 6 here, this neurosurgery that inverts your qualia. Victor, then Dan, and then Masood. Go ahead, Victor.
Really, really quickly.
Yeah.
What is essential here is that it's a scientific verification of a shift in qualia, right? Because he's denying the validity of qualia. So there's a scientific verification of a shift in quality, but ironically, it is a scientist who is causing it. I think that is essentially what he's doing here. He's demolishing the notion of quality, of qualia here through the irony that in the actual form of this intuition pump, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a scientific verification of a shift in qualia, but it's a scientist who has caused it.
Okay, good. Dan, what do you think about this one? Dan,
well, I think what he's doing here is setting up a functionalist account of qualia. And there's another paper by Dennett. It's called Consciousness Cannot Be Separated from Function. I don't know if you can read it, but that's what it's called. It's much more recent, around 2010 or something like that. And so what I think he is trying to say is that there's a common understanding that we see there's a red apple out there. The photons bounce off of it, they come in through our eyeballs, and our brain constructs a representation of the apple. And then it seems a certain way to us, it seems red. And so we make a judgment that it is red. But what he's trying to say is that we need to invert cause and effect. What happens is our brain function, results in judgments that it's red. At various levels, and there's no finishing line. There's no line where the representation comes through, and then we have all the information coming together in one point, and then we make the judgments. Instead, the processing is distributed throughout space, inside our brain, and through time, because different modules of the brain are processing at different rates, and at certain levels in that processing, they come up with their own judgments, and eventually, when it comes time to verbalize it, we do, we say, okay, the apple's red, but in fact, it's a functionalist approach, and I'm not sure. It's hard to talk about actually, so I'm not sure if I'm making that very clear. But he's trying to hint that there's a sort of confusion between cause and effect, I think.
Well, he's definitely going toward the functionalist kind of thing. If everybody says it's a red apple, who cares how it actually subjectively looks to each of us? Because all we care about is what we can publicly observe. That's very much what he's after. And so but my question is, does that mean we don't actually see redness? Who's next? Masood.
Yes. I don't necessarily agree with the whole paper or his conclusion, but I definitely disagree with almost all the criticism against the paper so far that people made. I think most people are just getting it there wrong. First of all, overinterpretation, like moving it to aesthetic or functionalism, I don't think they're really necessary. Like, we don't really have to think, okay, where we're gonna end up. Like, just get to see what we have here. He is playing skeptics. He doesn't need to prove there is such thing as qualia. I don't need to prove there is no God. Like, someone claims there is, okay, you have to go ahead and do it. But he did, took upon himself and tried to say, okay, let me just present you with an idea of qualia. Ineffable, private, whatever. And he brings some examples. Those intuition pumps are just to help us understand what he means by each of them. What does it mean to say private? What does it mean to say ineffable, whatever? And then he just tells us it's really not, we don't have such an entity that can actually have these properties. And then he is just doing it backward to say, see, I said this, but see, this example shows it can't have this. So here's the problem. He does talk about second order. I did mention that second order means it's like a metacognition. You can be a robot, you can have senses and everything, but you can have an extra thing on the top, a second order, which understand what you're doing. And that's what we generally consider, traditionally as qualia. So far, I think we really have to understand what he's saying. So that's why most of the comments are actually not correct. We're not really getting to what he is saying. We're just kind of going a little extra. And most of it is because we are depending a lot on our intuition. It just doesn't matter. You know, I have a lot of intuitions. I can really push you to believe it. So he did take, you know, this job and categorize it. So you can say these are all wrong. That's fine. That's completely fine. You can say this is not Qualia. And the only person who so far made a correct comment was Victor, and says, you know, I don't think Qualia is this. It's holistic. And that's a good start. You say, so I'm just going to reject the whole thing. I'm going to say this is Qualia, holistic. That's fine. But what the problem is, so there is no actual difference between philosophy of science. You know, some people say, you know, science is, positivism, empiricism, philosophy is different. That's completely wrong. Like, I'm sorry, a philosopher can make up a lot of, you know, useless nonsense and stuff. We shouldn't take them like a lot of Platonic form, whatever. So here's the thing. If I have something, some experiences, whatever it is, and I can never really communicate it. I can communicate, I can talk about it, just you have similar thing, but you cannot directly have any contact with it, right? Then we will have the problem of talking about it in a meaningful way. That's the thing, that's the point. So you can talk about this fine. He doesn't tell you, don't say, oh, I don't feel anything. I don't see red. Of course, you know, you say it, you do it. And it is, you know, it has some uses. But this communication is not something that we can really work on or agree on. It's nothing that we can say, okay, is it right? Is it wrong? Am I hallucinating? We just can't get to it. That's the main problem. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let's see, who's next is Phil. I have Phil, Les, Hussein, Alex, and Tommy. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, you know, I guess I'm going to be confused then, because I'll tell you a personal experience that fits this. You know, I'm an artist. I used to teach art. In fact, I used to teach color theory. And so that's a kind of a beginning class. And there was this guy, he was making some very interesting paintings in the color class. So I thought, well, this guy is just interesting, right? But he kept repeating the thing even when we were studying color charts. And so I said, and I had to be careful that I didn't insult his aesthetics. I said, you know, like your paintings are very interesting, but there's something that just seemed a little bit funny to me. Okay, I said, perhaps you might be at least part.
You're frozen, Phil. Something happened to your internet connection. So I'm sorry, we can't hear you and your face is frozen.
So he went and took.
Okay.
So he went and took a colorblind test, and indeed he was partially colorblind.
Okay.
And it completely shifted, you know, my idea of, I have to now understand his painting was that it's not just a matter of taste or whatever, but there was something else that pushed it in a different way. So it was an experience that I detected. So there was actually a transpersonal relationship. I wasn't exactly sure. And I also didn't want to embarrass himself. You just got damn bad taste, you know, because they were actually interesting. And so, but how did I detect that if I can't have at least some inkling of what he's feeling? Not exactly, but something is a little bit off. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting. So there was a kind of in that way, something that's a little bit public, even though it's private.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Alex Smith is next. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I'm just going to try to make my comment a little brief. I only read a few pages of this paper, so but I wanted to react sort of to a comment that Masood made. I would wholeheartedly disagree with the notion that, you know, only one other person in the room has made, you know, valuable comments in terms of the merits of criticizing Dennett's paper. Dennett, I wouldn't say, is only acting as a skeptic here and merely saying that, you know, that this term is not scientifically useful. I mean, in the beginning, like I said, I only read the few first pages, but he's basically taking the view that if you had an AI machine there, that had all the sensory experience it does, that it would be indistinguishable from us, right? There's no qualia in us and the non-existence of qualia in the AI machine. So I think he's in this sense, I was actually reminded by I think a lot of people in this room might know have heard of radical skepticism. I think that his skepticism, while he's not radical skepticism is something totally different, but he's being radically skeptic, meaning that I think that there are many justifiable reasons to have that intuition that that we do have a subjective experience that say a machine with our same sensory experiences doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you, Alex. I don't want to be rude or anything, but we're on the parts of the paper that's 5 and 6, intuition pumps 5 and 6 about alternative neurosurgery. If you haven't read that part of the paper, I'd ask you not to make comments because I want to focus on the paper itself. So the next one is Les Allen. Les, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. Look, I get the main thrust of Dennett's paper is using the old verificationist principle against the notion of qualia. If I'm right on that, I'm quite surprised because the verificationist principle was pretty much demolished from the 1960s on. And the second thing is, with his thought experiment, say the coffee thought experiment, or actually other ones as well, where it's unsure when the person has a different, seemingly has a different private perceptual experience about the taste of coffee. It could be that they're actually perceiving the coffee differently, or they're remembering their previous experiences differently. And this is the fallible element of what we think our private perceptual experiences are. Now, my feeling is that because he can understand the thought experiment and he can understand that it's impossible infallibly to determine one hypothesis over the other, whether he really did have a different perceptual experience or whether it was his memory or his belief had changed. Because Dennett actually understands the thought experiment and can work through it, makes me think that he really does know what qualia are. But then again, you could argue, well, he's not arguing against qualia having meaning, that we understand what qualia mean as private, introspective. He's only arguing that we understand what qualia is, but it just does not have a referent. And there I'm still a bit unclear what his end result is. Is it the qualia has no meaning, the term has no meaning, which would be understandable using the verificationist principle, or is he arguing because we can't verify what a particular private phenomenal experience is, because we can't verify whether it's this or that, that the term qualia has no referent? I'm unsure.
It's the latter, I believe. He's saying we have this notion of qualia and it has a meaning, but it doesn't refer to anything. There are no such things as qualia. But I'm glad you mentioned the coffee thing, because we're going to get to that just as soon as we hear from Claudio and Hussein.
I'll make a quick 5-second comment.
Yes.
I've read some of Dennett's work, and I think I think it's actually the former. I think he's just denying completely the existence of qualia, not just simply as a referent or something that's that can be scrutinized by scientific methods.
Yeah, but this is where you've got to be clear. Like unicorns, we all understand what unicorn means, so that's not the problem. The meaning of unicorn. The question is whether the term has a referent. And it seems like there's a bill saying that Dennett is advocating the second thesis. We understand what the term qualia means, just like we understand what unicorn means. It just happens to be the case there is no such referent.
Yeah, right on page 1, or not page 1, page 480, 381. He says, there are no such properties as qualia. They don't exist. So unicorns don't exist. Qualia don't exist. That's what he's saying. Okay, so Claudio and then Hussein, and then I want to go on to the next things about next intuition pumps, but go ahead, Claudio.
Well, those who are pro qualia, they seem to suggest that there's some type of ontological value regarding the qualia. It belongs part of in our ontological vocabulary, right? It implies stability, something that doesn't change, something that is intrinsic, that is correct, right? But these experiments prove that the scientists are able to change it, right? There's a physical explanation. The grass can appear red, and they can make it appear green. There are the people who are experiencing that they're unable to realize that, right? What's causing that? So there's no intrinsic quality. There's no ontological value. It's being manipulated from the outside, and it all has a physical explanation. It doesn't stand out by itself, the qualia. It's not separate from the physical components. So, where is the intrinsic value? Where is the, how does it belong within our ontological vocabulary, part of our ontology, something that is separate from the physical realm? I think that's part of it that it's trying to put forward. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. Hussein Dafa, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Bill. I actually agree completely with what Claudio is trying to bring out, and I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'll say that I think that these particular intuition pumps clearly show that Dennett adheres to a very computational view of the human mind, where you could argue that it's possible for thoughts and everything that the human mind produces to be reduced to functions, which not only implies a possibility of simulating the human mind in a sufficiently powerful computer, something that's certainly up for debate, but it indicates to me, and this is, I think this is what Claudio is trying to bring out, that Dennett is not able to make a clear distinction between the ontologically objective and the ontologically subjective, which are two fundamentally different modes of existence. So when you have things like oceans, mountains, planets, all the way down to electrons, all of these things have an existence regardless of what anybody thinks, right? So while other things, like today's subject matter, qualia, the sensation of pain or redness, or even the taste of cauliflower, all of these things exist as a result of conscious experience. Now, the first class are ontologically objective, while the second class is ontologically subjective. And I would argue that confusing these two classes would cause someone like Dennett to commit only to one class and forsake the other, which is possibly what is going on here. Thank you.
That's very possible. That's real close, I think. But good. So let's go on to intuition pumps 7 and 8. Intuition pump 7. These guys, Chase and Sanborn. Chase says, I used to like this coffee. It tastes the same, but I don't like it anymore. My taste in the sense of what I appreciate has changed. Same stuff, but I don't like it anymore. Sanborn says, this stuff tastes different. That's not the coffee I used to know, and I don't like it. So neither Chase nor Sanborn like what they're experiencing now. Chase thinks the coffee tastes the same, but he doesn't like it anymore. Sanborn thinks the coffee is different. That's why I don't like it. Okay. Dennett saying, he goes into, well, maybe the taste has changed. Maybe your memories have changed. How do you know? You can't tell whether maybe it really tastes the same, but you remember it differently, so you think it tastes different. Or maybe it's really different, and that's why you don't like it. And there's no objective way to tell. Okay. He says, but after it's all said, Chase or Sanborn might object. But after all is said and done, there's still something I know in a special way. I know how it is with me right now. Both Chase and Sanborn can tell you that. Chase says, I know how it is to me. Coffee is the same, but I don't like it anymore. Sanborn says, here's how it is to me. I know exactly how it is. Coffee tastes different, and I don't like it. But Dennett says, if absolutely nothing follows from this presumed knowledge, I'm on page, I don't know where I am, I lost the page number, but it's the part about intuition pump 7. So that's on page 7 is, hang on a minute.
393, is it? 392?
Somewhere in there. 7 starts about page 389. So he says, if nothing, absolutely nothing follows from this presumed knowledge, the knowledge of what it is for me right now. Nothing, for instance, that would shed any light on the different psychological claims that might be true of Chase or Sanborn. What is the point of asserting that one has it? Okay, I see Tommy grimacing. I sort of grimace at this too. There's no objective way to tell. Did Chase's taste buds change so that the coffee tastes differently? Or did Sanborn's taste buds not change, but he remembers it falsely? There's no way to tell, okay? But both Chase and Sanborn can object. After all is said and done, there's still something I know in a special way. I know how it is with me right now. I find that persuasive, even though Dennett doesn't. So my question is, let's talk about this now. Dennett talks about the etiology of the qualia. So what caused it to come about, or caused them to come about? Did the taste buds change and therefore you don't like it anymore? Or the taste buds not change, but your appreciation of it changed? And how do you know what's what here? And he talks about, oh yeah, here we go. Page 390 and 391. So these 3 possibilities. Chase's coffee taste qualia have stayed constant, while his reactive attitudes to these qualia have shifted. Or B, Chase is simply wrong about the constancy of his qualia. They have shifted gradually and imperceptibly over the years, while the standards of taste have not budged. You can't tell from the outside which one of those is true. And then to see, it might be some half and half. Same thing in Sanborn. This is on page 391. Case A, his quality has shifted due to some sort of derangement in his perceptual machinery, but his standards have remained constant. It's the inverse of Chase here. Chase B, Sanborn's standards have shifted unbeknownst to him. He's thus misremembering his past experiences, okay? Or it might be somewhere in between. What does that prove? I mean, let's just assume that he's right. Maybe Chase's taste buds have changed and maybe his reactions have changed. Same with Sanborn. What does that demonstrate? What does that prove? So I invite people to answer that question. I'm going to call on Masood and then Les.
Thank you. I'm going to use an analogy of hallucination. So imagine you're sick, you have hallucination. So how do you know you are hallucinating? And usually it might be at the time, you just compare it, with your regular reality and memory. It can be after that, like after that, when everything comes back to normal, you realize, that was not real, that was hallucination. So in terms of qualia, if you have no point of reference, how you can tell? Like you can never know if it is something constant, if it is changing. And I do find his examples of, having the problem of not really knowing what our qualia is. Like it's not clear. Is it a clear identity? Is it, is it changing every day, every moment? We have no way of knowing. So I'm gonna, also following Hussein and what he said about the ontological commitment to, subjective ontology. I'm gonna use a weaker version of his example. So let's say, yes, it does, exist. Of course, the problem is this word existence. It can be very, very problematic in metaphysics. But let's say we're not saying it exists or it doesn't. Let's just forget about that. But say, can we talk about it? If I tell you something about my qualia, I mean, is there any way for you to know that's true, that's false? Can you ever know? Even I can't know. Might be changing any moment. So here's the problem, is the problem of access. Since our access is unclear, there's no point of reference. So talking about it is always very, very shaky without any foundation. You might say, actually, God exists. God created us all on a similar ground, all similar qualia. Yes, it is possible, but we still don't know. So as long as we don't know, we have to accept that there is no way to know. Any statement we make about qualia are correct or incorrect. This is a weaker kind of version of his argument I'm making. Just two very short ones about AI. I think that's overinterpretation again of his thing. And about holism, as I said, holism is just another rival theory. It's not something against it. Thank you.
2 seconds. A radical skeptic could make the same argument. I mean, anyone could. I could say everyone in this room is a advanced artificial intelligence robot with no consciousness, by mere virtue of, me not being able to gain accessibility. So the question is not whether, the question is that a justified way to move forward?
It doesn't make a difference. You can believe all of us are artificial intelligence. It doesn't make a difference in your behavior or things you do.
Okay,
right?
just 5 seconds, because I know I haven't read this part, but it does make a difference, I think, in terms of say where scientific research is headed, right? So if qualia is dismissed completely from philosophical discourse and scientific discourse, it's not going to be something that's going to be investigated.
No, here's the thing. We might be missing the point. So we have all this, AI, other problems, talking about Chinese room, whatever. That's a separate thing. So he's talking about just the subjective experience as he defined it here. As I said, you might say this definition is wrong. I'm going to come up with a separate definition. That's fine. But if you accept the definition, this definition is something we cannot talk about. I mean, we can, but there's no way to know it's right, wrong, or what it is. Like, we don't even know if we have real access to it. The clear, direct access even is completely, unclear. That's the thing.
Okay, thank you, Masood. Tommy, I'm sure you have something quite perspicuous. Let me hear it.
So you're asking what difference does this make? What are these intuition pumps doing? Why do we care that you can't, make these judgments as to how the qualia has changed? I think what's happening again, Dennett's building the pressure all the time. He's got us on the hook now, where he's giving us examples and saying, "See, you still can't do it. It's getting more and more difficult to hang on to this illusion." He thinks, but I think that's what he's trying to do. Each time he says, "See, you cannot show where these differences are. There's a qualia difference probably, but we can't prove it." He thinks he's increasing his case, but he's increasing his case if you're a materialist and if you believe, say, that physics or the universe is closed under physics and so on. That to me is where it's falling down. Going back to Masood's point earlier on, I think there is a problem here of understanding what it is he's trying to say exactly. And I would be almost with you if he hadn't gone as far as earlier on saying, he said specifically, this is not an example of whereof one cannot speak, thereon one must remain silent. He says, not even that. It's just nonsense. My view is that no, this is the private argument. In practice, he's exactly right that we can't talk about qualia, but that doesn't mean there's no qualia. It just means whereof one. This is a perfect example of something of which we cannot speak, and he tries to say no, it's not, but it's just a brute assertion. So I think what he's again, the pressure's building up with each of these pumps, and if you're bewitched if you have science envy, which I think Dennett does, is various points really. It's like, I wish I was a scientist. Really, I really would have been. If I was doing it again, I'd be a scientist. No, he's because he's in a space that science can't touch. But if you don't spot that, then I think what's going to happen is going to become more and more compelling. It's like, oh, damn it, we can't tell the difference. He's right. There's no qualia. That's not the right conclusion. The right conclusion is he's right. We can't talk about qualia.
Ah, okay. So what you're, okay, that's interesting. So you're asserting not that there are no qualia. You're asserting that we either can't talk about them or it's really hard to talk about them.
The first of those two things. It's really, really tough. It's a veil we can't get to at all. We can't. I think this, I mean, we had spoke about this a couple of years ago, that our language, I think our language itself talks about our experiences. It cannot talk about the experiencer. It's just a limit. There's nothing we can do about that. And it's very similar to the problem of anatta, of self and no self. There's really no argument there. That's why it's so difficult to get across, because we can't speak of it. But as Wittgenstein said, if you've already spotted this, if you've already experienced this, it's like a wink, wink. You know what I'm talking about. In other words, if you're experiencing qualia right now, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, well, I'm probably talking to a zombie. But that's it. That's all I can say.
Okay, good. Okay, Victor Provenzano, go ahead.
Well,
Victor.
he's toying with us, and he's toying with the concept, and he's using intuition pumps as his thought experiments, and he is claiming to be on the side of science. But if he was on the side of science as a neuroscientist, here is what he would say. He would say, first of all, that even though he claimed at one point that the qualia was holistic, that you couldn't separate out redness or pain or a scent from the entirety of the qualitative experience. He was just doing that to establish in our minds what he means by qualia. If he was a neuroscientist, he would be telling you that the qualia, the holistic qualia, is sui generis. And it's sui generis from one instant to another. Because first of all, even though the neurons in our body, okay, the neurons in our brains are the most enduring cells in our body, right? What gives us the illusion of identity, and he would argue against an identity psychology or identity philosophy. What gives us the illusion of identity is the permanence of the neurons. These neurons that are the same neurons that we had as toddlers are not the same neurons. Okay, they do not die, but they are incessantly renewing themselves. If you were to look at a time lapse of a single neuron, what you would see is proteins that are being renewed, that are replacing the proteins that are being expelled as waste, are being made in every instant, in every microsecond, throughout the single cell. Okay, so the cell is not the same. The way in which the action potentials fire is not the same. The biochemistry is not precisely the same. The array of neurons that fire when you see the red or feel the pain from a knife cut on the finger, whatever it happens to be, are not the same. And arrays of neurons, right, form, and some of them are linked, and some of them are in separate parts of the brain and have to be processed in new parts of the brain. This would fit in with his multiple drafts theory in his explanation of consciousness. If he was being a scientist, he would tell you that every qualia is sui generis, every single one. Okay, from one instant to another. So it doesn't matter whether we talk about memory. It doesn't talk about whether we talk about 6 years ago. The the new qualia of sipping Maxwell House coffee by Chase and Sanborn, which is ironic because that's the name of a coffee company. So once again, he's using philosophical irony here, that it is always utterly unique.
Yeah, but that's what he does say. If you look at the top of 392, he says, a subjective experience of the qualif, if and only if the subject judges experience to be qualif, we can then treat such judgings as constitutive acts, in effect bringing the quail into existence with the same sort of license as novelists, right? That's exactly what he says. He says every time you're creating what is this Maxwell coffee-ness, right? This intrinsicness, there's somehow no universal intrinsicness to Maxwell coffee every time you're creating that yourself, right? That's what he's saying.
But all he's trying to do basically is argue for the multiple drafts theory to replace the notion of qualia. That's all he's basically doing. He's not even using his term, but that he's basically saying that my term, which I don't think is good, he should say something like multiple fields theory or multiple subfields that coincide, that relate to or that are not related to one another, give us the evolving experience. That would be a better way. Just to use the word fields rather than drafts. He takes the word drafts from the notion of those who were critiquing his ideas as they were embryonic, as he wrote his various drafts.
Yeah, but
he applies that to the philosophical concept. That's what he's doing. He's arguing for multiple drafts instead of qualia.
I'll tell you, Victor, he's put up an explanation of the straw man, if you like, of what he's saying qualia is, right? Which is intrinsic, private, and so on. That's what he's fighting against in the argument, right? I will say that is a very common understanding of what qualia is. From all my reading over the past years, people talk about blueness. People look at the sky and they see blueness. I think his straw man that he's putting up is a reasonable understanding of what a lot of people consider qualia to be. And I think his argument knocks that down in a number of different ways as to why it's sort of meaningless to have this concept of qualia like that.
Huh. Okay, let's
object to the straw man. I object to it.
Okay, let's go on. I want to hear from Phil, who's next. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, it seems to me that there's kind of two problems. One is that you're trying to pin down a dynamic, evolving process in an absolute quantitative measurement in a language that's going to be exact. And I just do believe that the language could also be somewhat inexact, such as poetry, and you could talk about things in a way that allows it to grow and evolve. And so in some sense, we all know that we change. For instance, I am older now, and I notice my eyes are getting worse. I think that's objectively getting worse. It's not my brain action, is that my eyes, and I could talk to my doctor and say, things are a little bit fuzzier, and then one eye, for instance, in the morning I get up and it's like it's cloudy, and then it takes me a while to adjust, and then when I get tired, it fades in and out a little bit. And I could describe these things not as an exact measurement, but something that's sensible enough for the doctor to say, oh, okay, we need to give you an eye test. Okay, so in some sense, it's not that I go there and I'm just babbling nonsense. I'm talking to him. The other thing it also be is that you, through your own work and training, you could actually get more and more subtle about your experiences. I remember I had a student who one day said, before I took your color class, I thought the blue was blue, but now I see red in the blue. I see green in the blue. And that makes it so much more complex and more subtle. That's something that she learned because we went through a kind of training. She had an ability to do that. So you could on the one hand be slipping. We say, oh, the Joe is slipping. That's a very sloppy way of saying like he's kind of like losing some of his capacity, or you could just be you advancing. That this is what we want to do through education and training, despite all maybe limited capacity. So you could move up and you can move down. So it's a dynamic process. You can't pin it down. And every day, when you drink coffee, well, is it because my taste buds, or is it because I've actually now developed a more subtle relationship of judging the coffee? I used to like it because, it was this way, but now I see that there's some deficiencies. There's not enough redness in the blue. So I'm thinking, well, I used to like it, but I don't like it anymore. So, it's like, but doesn't mean that I cannot say something. If somebody asks, well, why is it that way? You can't just answer that, well, I used to like it then, I don't like it now. And that's the end of the conversation. You're not getting the subtlety in what you begin to understand about your own judgment of how to evaluate something.
Okay, good. Thank you. We are at, in Texas, 8:45. It's something else 45, wherever you may be. So we have 15 more minutes. I want to, well, first thing I want to do is put in a sort of plug for my writings and my website and so forth. So I'm going to put in the chat box the link to my website where you can find a lot of my writings. And I have a book called How to Be an Excellent Human, and I've got my blog and all kinds of stuff. So I just want to encourage you to take a look at that if you like. But for the last 15 minutes, let's go back. I think we don't have time to go through the rest of his paper in detail, but right on the front page, he says, there are no such properties as qualia. Okay. Given these arguments and intuition pumps and so forth, do you agree? Are there are there in fact personal subjective qualities, visual or auditory or tactile or whatever? Are there in fact raw feels, phenomenal properties, subjective or intrinsic properties? Does our experience have a qualitative character? These are all sort of substitutions or equivalents of the term qualia. He says, no, these things don't exist. Well, is he right? Are you convinced by his arguments? In what way has he got something going for himself here? In what way is he all wet? So I'm just going to open it up to general discussion. So what do y'all think?
One answer to the question would be
just a whistle.
Just as Wittgenstein was reputed to do, is just to whistle. Because on the one hand, I want to say, yeah, of course I believe there's qualia, but on the other hand, if I stick to my guns, then the answer to the question is the qualia is not yes or no, it's what? Is there what? His position is there's not a coherent thing. And he actually makes an error, I think, in this way, further back up in the paper, where he talks about a sort of a defense that's given by some people who are trying to argue against they have a very simple view of what qualia is, and they think they can defend against that. And he says, they talk about, we will show you that you're just slightly in error about the nature of qualia. And Dennett responds, no, what they ought to have said is, what's qualia? And I'm saying, no, he's got it wrong as well. He should have said the nature of what. The concept itself is just broken. It's like, is God omnipotence? The idea of omnipotence. Can a supreme being that can do anything create a rock that a supreme being then cannot lift? The answer to that question is not yes or no, it's a what. And so, yes, I believe there's qualia, but really, if I want to be strict about it, my answer has to be, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so when whoever it was talked about, here's a red apple, here's a green apple. You don't know what he's talking about? Really?
Yeah, those words, it looks like those words apply to this thing. The same as, Hilary Putnam's idea about the brain in a vat. The problem with that is you've got to have a proper connection between the term and the thing it's pointing to. And that there is no connection there. It really looks like it. This is the bewitchment of language that Wittgenstein was warning about. And it's not there. That's not meaningful.
Okay, so we have language that says, oh, here's redness, here's a red apple. Here's greenness, and the instantiated is a green apple, and we use it as if these were things out in the real objective world that we could all point to. If I say, oh, there's the Eiffel Towers in Paris, we can all go to Paris or see pictures of Paris. Say, yep, sure enough, there's the Eiffel Tower. It's out there in the world, subjective. So I say, oh, there's
that's all meaningful, yeah.
But if I say, that apple looks red to me, the words sound like we're talking about something out there, but really they're not. That's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Well, no, I mean, the intention is that the words are talking about something in there. But when you look at them close enough, they're not doing it. He's right, it's that thing that but it's not that it doesn't exist. Like when Russell tried to criticize Frege, Wittgenstein criticized Russell, saying you can't use the broken concept to say the broken concept is broken. And it's the same problem here. It's that our language just isn't up to it, because language doesn't do that. Language is it's not an ontological thing. It's for describing experience, not to describe experiencers.
Let's go back to something simple like redness, right? Okay. Those of us who are not colorblind will have, to some degree, a shared experience of what redness is. But my unique sense of any red is not the same as any of your unique senses of what red is, and is the red, and to what extent you can even express in language, or even capable of expressing in language, what, a red which is washed out, a red which is saturated, a red which has, blood orange hues in it, a red that is, slightly violet. Are you even able to make these distinctions? Like, the person who hears the overtone, the octave overtone over the E when the E is plucked. I had a roommate who could hear 5 overtones over a single note on an instrument, and he could hear a car horn go by and tell you which overtones were missing. Okay, so there's all those distinctions, perceptual distinctions to be made, and there's the uniqueness of what you are in the moment, so that the red does not have the same. I'm not talking about something that has meaning. Does not have the same. As you do not have the same aesthetic response to the same red. The same red is not the same red because it does begin to fade. It does become less saturated as light strikes it, right? So what you've got is nothing but sui generis experiences. What you have is nothing but an unending series of qualia, and those qualia are not separable into red or into pain or into blankness, whatever you want to name. They are always a holistic experience, which is bodily, and every experience of the mind is bodily, and every experience of the body is mindful. So this is why he's utterly wrong, because he says it's practically ineffable when it is holistically ineffable. He says that these are public properties. Yes, I can say the word red, and there's, as Jonathan Searle says, he just draws a circle, and there's a point at which my definition of red is similar or highly similar or somewhat similar to yours, but they are not perfectly the same. In fact,
how do you even, wait, Victor, how do you even know that your perception, your qualitative experience of a red apple is the same as or different from somebody else's? How do you even know that?
Because I know that my experience of red for me is never the same.
Okay, so your experience of redness keeps changing. All right.
Because my experience of the world keeps changing. Each instant is unique because of the holism, because of the set of other, he always talks about the eye darting. He always says that where our centers of attention are always shifting because the eye naturally darts, right? And so where, my experience of the red is mixed with the black border at one point, and then it's mixed with the white dot, which is below the red, the red painting, which is on the wall. And then it is never the same.
So Victor, are there subjective qualities of experience?
Yes, in fact,
okay.
Our
So basically, your
experiences are subjective.
So you're disagreeing with Dennett. And it says there are no such properties as Qualia, and he goes on to say Qualia is a subjective qualitative qualities, phenomenal qualities. You're saying Dennett's wrong. Okay, great. That's great. Fine. Thank you. Phil and Ben. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I think he is wrong. I think there is a subjective experience, but the path you get there, I mean, it could be tricky. Once again, I'm going to go back to teaching color theory. This was toward the beginning of my teaching, not at the very beginning, but toward the beginning. I happen to have a couple that's a husband and a wife, and they were both seniors. They were retired, and they took the class together. And I had a lot of trouble with the guy, but not so much with the wife. In fact, I said I'm seem to have less problems with her. And he because he spent, I think, 40 years as a machinist, and he's about measurements. And he just kept asking me, like, well, how much red should I mix with the orange? Could you give me the proportion? And I says, well, I can't at the moment, because depending on the manufacturer and everything else, what you do is how you approach it, this in terms of experiential way to do it, is to take some red, a little bit of it, mix it with some yellow, and then no, that's not quite enough the tone you want. Mix some more and more. He just couldn't get that process idea. He wanted, because he lived his life as a man. If you just give me the proportion, I'll get there. I'll make it exact. And his wife didn't have that approach. She just sort of like continued to experience it as a process, and it was easier for her to get there. And he just had all out of trouble. I said, well, you need to actually begin to change your attitude a little bit about your approach. And maybe that's part of the hindrance. And I think in the same way, we're trapped in this sort of trap in which we think that if we could just get the measurements right, that we got the answer. But in fact, sometimes the measurement sometimes the color or something else, it's just more complex and nuanced than we expect a simple measurement, could be. And so you can't do that one. Industry, of course, they're very careful in mixing, so much of this versus that, and you get the exact red, and they test it out, look at it, and they put it out. But different companies have different, formulas, and so you can't at the moment say, oh, well, you just make 1/3 of this and 3/5 of that, and you got it. I can't do that.
One's an objective, measurable approach. The other one's subjective, qualitative, feeling approach, right?
That's why, and sometimes when you get on one track, you can't get off that track.
Right. Okay, good. We're running out of time, so I want to call on Ben, Dan, and James, and then I'm going to wrap it up a little bit. So Ben.
Well, I think he makes it clear that he's not saying there are no subjective qualities of experience. That's not what qualia are. There's specifically subjective qualities of experience that are ineffable, intrinsic, private and directly apprehensible. And he distinguishes these from other qualities of experience, subjective qualities that don't have those traits, right? He doesn't deny that there are subjective qualities of experience. He just denies that there are any that have those 4 traits. It seems to me, I mean, I think I would have to read this about 10 times in order to really have a real much certainty about it. But it seems to me he makes a decent case that you can be wrong about your own qualia. And that seems to suggest that there are no qualia, because I think the idea is that you can't be wrong about your own qualia. So the example with the coffee tasters, Chase and Sanborn, seems like a good example of that. Another example is that your description of your qualia might not change over time, and yet the subjective experience might. For example, you might describe something as red in 2 different periods of time, but in the meantime, in theory, you could be experiencing some kind of progressive color blindness and not know it. So you could insist that these 2 things are both red, and actually you would be experiencing them differently and not know it. And so that seems to refute the idea that you can't be wrong about your own qualia, which refutes the existence of qualia entirely, if I understand the definition.
Okay, thanks. Dan Eckham, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, there's an interesting example of divorcing redness from an object, which Dennett gives in a video that I've seen a few times. Imagine that you're looking at a large projection of a flag, but the colors are inverted. So it's an American flag, but it's black, yellow, and green instead of red, white, and blue. You stare at it for a minute on the central point, and then it's taken away. It's a white screen, and you see an after image, and you see red stripes. Okay, so that's a red that is not an aspect or an attribute or characteristic of any object. It's purely the function of the opponent processes of our optical system, which our red receptors become fatigued or something like that. And so we see an illusion of red. And if we did this all together and we all stared at it for a minute, we would all agree that we're looking at red, but that red attaches to no object. So he's getting there at the idea of function. This is all brain function. And we make a mistake if we think that it's just an aspect of a phenomenon. What's happening is our brain is processing things in its own peculiar way, including this opponent process, which involves fatigue. And then that comes up with sensations that we make judgments about. And I think Tommy said a couple of things that were very interesting earlier. One, that this is just not a useful concept, sort of ontologically. We can't prove it or disprove it. Why are we even talking about it? I agree with that. But he also said that Dennett is not a scientist, and I disagree with that. I think Dennett is a cognitive science, which is an unfortunate position to be in because it's the most difficult subject in the world. But what he's trying to do is get beyond the first person explanation, which is, figuring out what we're experiencing when we experience phenomena, and we're sort of using introspection, which is not a very scientific method. But getting from there to a third person explanation, which is what is the brain doing, and how does it transform these raw sensory data into judgments that we then experience as our consciousness and as ourself.
Okay. He's clearly way over on the objective, intersubjective kind of publicly verifiable end of things. I think he's saying something like, and I could be wrong here, maybe it's a caricature of Dennett, but I think he's going to say what's really real is what we can objectively determine and measure and inquire about, do experiments on from a third person point of view. And so all this talk from subjective point of view, private, personal, from a third person point of view, you can't, you're right, you can't say anything about it. It doesn't figure into the explanation if you're thoroughly in the third person point of view. My question is,
yeah, go ahead.
well, does that obviate the first person point of view? I don't think so. But
okay. What he likes to say sometimes is to distinguish phenomenology from heterophenomenology. And phenomenology he considers basically the product of introspection. But the problem is that we don't all agree on what the phenomena are. And so what he's saying that if we're going to take a scientific approach, we need to consider the data to be not what the phenomena are, but what the subjects report of the phenomena are. And that's the starting point of heterophenomenology.
Exactly. And in order to have a report about phenomena, and in order to have lots of people's reports about their perception of their phenomena, you have to have a perception of a phenomena in the first place. That's what I'm trying to argue for the importance of a first person point of view. We are getting out of time. I'll tell you what, one more, James, and then we'll totally wrap up. So,
Yeah,
James.
I think talking about consciousness is very difficult, right? There's a lot of ways which our language works against us. So even saying I think, right, to start off with has a problem, right? And similarly, I think the point of this is that when we're talking about using words like qualia in conversations, there are certain meanings which I think are the problem is it's already very poorly defined to begin with, but he gives a definition which I think is reasonable from what I've heard talking about. But I think what he's showing is that the use of the word in conversations actually is a very bad one. And it's a bit of a trap, right? There is no intrinsic notion of blueness because it changes, right? And he's not denying subjective experience. I'll just echo what Ben's saying. He's not denying subjective experience, but actually, on the Wikipedia page, there is a very interesting article about his take on the Mary, the color theorist, right? And her experience, right? Is subjective experience knowledge, right, or not? But suffice to say, that's just my take on it, right? I agree. I think that anybody who talks about qualia, it's actually a distraction from really getting to the heart of this. And you can say, hey, this coffee doesn't taste as good anymore. You don't need to talk about the qualia of the coffee, right? Or use that word.
I wanted to thank Dan Eckham for the quality of his statements, and since he made a number of interventions at the very end, we ended on Eckham's razor.
Okay, is that an objectively verifiable? That's great. I love it. Okay, y'all. I don't think we've come to a position that we all agree on, but at least we've examined the arguments and kind of figured out what makes sense, what makes sense to say, and under what conditions it makes sense to say it. Maybe that's enough. Anyway, I want to thank you all for participating tonight, and I will do something more, probably not on this topic, but I'll have some more things coming up in the near or possibly far future. So once again, check out my website.
Thanks for moderating, Bill.
Yep, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks for moderating.
Oh, thanks for being there, Tommy. Okay. All right, y'all. So enjoy the quality of your experience, and
thank you.
as you go on with your day or night or whatever it is. Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, Bill.
Good night, everyone.
Okay.
Bye. Good night.